everybody, to another episode of Continence Chat. We really appreciate you listening in. I'm here today with my wonderful colleague and co-host, Susie Fox, who will probably share some information in a minute or two. But I wanted to introduce everybody to our guest today. I think many people in the senior living space will know Jean Hartnett, who is the founder and CEO of Radical Sabbatical. I just love even saying that. It just flows off my lips, Radical Sabbatical. But welcome, Jean. We're so glad that you've taken your time to chat with us. And if you wouldn't mind, as a way of getting started, maybe just introduce yourself, a little bit of background. And I need to know how Radical Sabbatical came to be in business and how that name came to be.
Oh my gosh. Yes. It's not a super interesting story, but there is a reason. So hello, Deanna. Hello, Susie. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm just so grateful to be here after what seems like several months of trying to get us scheduled together. So for your listeners' sake, my name is Jean Hartnett. I am the founder of Radical Sabbatical. It is an education and consulting firm that I created in order to bring trauma awareness and trauma healing to the senior living environments. And I started my company in 2022 in my parents' basement when I was caring for them before they passed away. And so when I decided to make that move from Omaha, Nebraska to Hubbard, Nebraska, which is in rural Nebraska, I told one of my older brothers, I said, you know what, Joe, when taking care of mom and dad, I'm going to go on a sabbatical. But instead of it just being like a normal sabbatical, I'm going to make it a radical sabbatical. And even when I told him that, I didn't know what that meant, but it turned out it meant starting a business with that name and becoming really kind of the trauma-informed care expert for senior living, and just learning everything that I could as I'm caring for mom and dad about this topic of trauma. So that's how it came about.
Wow. Jean, I thank you for that. I was reading a comment that you made about your own healing journey and how trauma therapy, EMDR, yoga, and writing helped you reach all the way back to adolescence and pull those experiences forward to the present in order to make sense of it all. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Absolutely. So it's important for your listeners to know that I first became aware of trauma-informed care when I was leading Nebraska's largest skilled nursing facility. The Douglas County Health Center is the largest skilled nursing facility, I think both in budget, but certainly in beds. And at the time, the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, was requiring that skilled nursing facilities be trauma-informed. It's FTAG 699, and for your listeners who are in skilled nursing environments, they will know FTAG 699. And they may know the language of the regulation, but they may not know, even still, years later, how to implement a trauma-informed care model. And I was one of those administrators who read the regulation and had no idea what it meant. I mean, it's like, several stanzas long. It's, what I call, the healthiest word salad you will ever eat. And it just didn't make any sense to me. So I called the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and I said, what is it you want me to do here? I am flummoxed. And what they told me is that 90% of older adults have experienced a traumatic event in their lifetime. And that's according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So it's not a made-up statistic. And then they went on to tell me that 85% of older adults die by suicide. It's the second highest rate of death in our older adult population. So if that wasn't a wake-up call to say, okay, I've got to figure this out, I probably haven't received any other type of wake-up call in my career as those two statistics. So it got me really curious about what trauma is. And, as an individual who considers herself a person who has had trauma, I hadn't related those statistics to my own life or even the definition of what trauma is. But eventually, my professional world and my personal world on what trauma is from a clinical perspective and what trauma is, how I experienced it on the personal level, collided. And when I talk about going all the way back into my adolescence, it was really kind of diving into an unplanned pregnancy I had at 16 that ended in a closed adoption when I was 17. And then my daughter reaching out to me 28 years later and really reconciling with what happened in my life in those 28 years. And it was a lot. The trauma wasn't the pregnancy. The trauma was how the person I needed to become in order to remain in society as a pregnant teenager. And, in my world, in my decades of growing up in the 80s, we didn't talk about those things. If a problem happened in the family, you just kind of dealt with it. You didn't get an opportunity to really talk about it. And then once the pregnancy was over, the adoption was closed, people didn't talk about it for decades. And so that silence, which you also hear a lot from trauma survivors, that silence really reinforced that we're not supposed to talk about it. And I'm going to throw another, nursing home word at you. I'm completely compliant. If someone tells me don't talk about it, I'm not going to talk about it. And so what the trauma healing journey for me, Susie, was really going back to that time as a pregnant teenager and reconciling in my body, my mind, and my spirit what it was that I needed to do in order to survive that situation. So I equated my personal experiences, and I thought, I wonder if other people feel this way. I wonder if other people have similar types of trauma. And then when I heard those statistics from the CMS, I was like, well, clearly they do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the mission is get everyone aware of what may have happened to them in a very safe way, help them on a path to healing, and perhaps they will come into our senior living communities as individuals who are ready to take care of older adults who have also experienced trauma. So that's what Radical Sabbatical does.
Yeah. It's a wow factor. I was with someone recently in the senior living space, and we were having a conversation, and I feel like, but it could be my own lack of information. Is the term new trauma informed, or is it just becoming more aware? Because I feel like articles, others that are in the space of providing, I just feel like it's becoming, and maybe it's becoming more talked about.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious if there's more an increase of people coming forward, if there's more trauma, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I have several.
Okay.
So I'll start with why I think it's becoming more prevalent in our space of long-term care and senior living. Obviously, because of that F-tag, right? It's a requirement now. However, I do believe that our profession, being long-term care and senior living, is becoming more aware of the topic because of a landmark study that was done in 1998. So this is how I got all fired up about it. So I'll explain the study because it'll get you fired up as well. So in 1998, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and Kaiser Permanente studied 17,000 adults, and were studying their health history, their chronicity, their mental health or behavioral issues, where they were on the socioeconomic rung. And the idea of the two physicians that were studying this were really trying to understand if there are psychological underpinnings to disease and health. And what they found in studying these 17,000 individuals is that there absolutely are psychological underpinnings to disease and health. And those psychological underpinnings, or those things, those adversities, as they called them, are typically things that happen to adults when they were in childhood. So they came up and found that there are 10 common childhood adversities that many of us experience. And those adversities are child abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, physical neglect, emotional neglect, having a drug addicted or alcoholic family member in your home, having an incarcerated individual as a part of your family, being separated from your parents either through death or divorce. So those adversities, if you will, there are 10 total. And what the study found is that everyone has an ACE score. So they called it basically an ACE score, an adverse childhood experience. So for every experience that you had, you got a 1, And what the study found is when you have 4 or more ACEs, that is when you see kind of the matriculation of poor health outcomes into adulthood. So when I learned about this assessment, I thought to myself, I literally was like, oh my gosh, we need this in senior living. We need an ACEs-like assessment to help us understand the lives of our older adults so that we can better care for them. And then I took it a step further and I said, oh, wait a minute, but I have an ACE score. And I was a healthcare worker, way back in the 80s. So I need to know my ACE score. So that got me fired up about really helping workforce and the care force understand ACEs and trauma. And so the first time I talked about this was in kind of on a national stage, was in 2023 at the National Association of Healthcare Assistants Conference. So imagine just an auditorium chock full of frontline caregivers. And that entire audience, I talked about, we weren't being recorded, but I talked about going to the Bruce Springsteen concert. You would have thought I was Bruce on stage because everybody was so fired up about this topic.
Wow.
And that's when I knew that I was onto something in terms of applying adversity and trauma, not only to the older adult, but to the people that do the care providing.
Yeah. And that's going to lead me to a question, because now you've got my wheel spinning. So in the caregiving space, I will never say all. Never, because there's just so many dynamics, whatever. But from what I've heard from some different senior living owners, operators, when we think of care givers that are providing for older adults, they could have, and some do have, not all, but some do have trauma happening in their own lives that could be related to keeping food on the table, a roof over their head. So the trauma, in a sense, right, could be happening right now as they're going into the workforce to care for someone, with the thought being, how do they care for others if their hierarchy of needs are being challenged for themselves? And we were having this conversation, it seems to be sadly growing. Are you seeing that? And I would think your services could hopefully combat some of that.
Yeah, not only are we seeing it, but we have studied it. And by we, I mean CARE, the senior technology firm, the app on your phone that allows frontline caregivers and professional nurses to staff themselves into a nursing home. When I talked about that first keynote that I had at the conference, the CEO and the vice president of Hero Development from CARE were in the audience. So Charles Turner and Katie Roan, also very well-known names in our profession, they were in the audience and they saw what I heard, which was this overwhelming response that, yes, she's talking not only about me, but to me. And so Katie and Charles came up to me afterwards and said, we need to study this. You're onto something. And I was like, hot dog, you're the partners I've been waiting for. So we did kind of a replication of the original ACEs study. We developed with CARE leading the charge and the National Association of Healthcare Assistants also collaborating. We recreated the ACEs assessment. So we asked 1,200 CNAs, CMAs, LPNs, and RNs the 10 ACEs questions. Then we asked them how COVID-19 impacted their physical and mental health. We asked a handful of questions on well-being. And to your point, Deanna, we asked them questions related to social determinants of health. And so I'll just take the two bookends. So I'll take the ACEs results. In the original study, 17% of the 17,000 people that Kaiser Permanente studied had an ACEs score of 4 or more. And remember that 4 or more is when it really starts to impact how you matriculate into adulthood and older adulthood. In the senior living profession, 4 or more ACEs is double that, meaning 34% of our care providers have 4 or more ACEs. The last report, so that's all detailed in report number 1. In report number 3, we looked at social determinants of health, and we looked at food scarcity, housing instability, unreliable transportation, safety at home, and those numbers are stark. 75% being food and housing insecure, many people unable to meet their utility bills on a monthly basis. I think it was 15% don't feel safe going home. And so we've got real issues in our communities. And that's the work that Radical Sabbatical does, is go into communities and help leaders understand what their workforce is facing. Yeah. And so, so I will answer that. So I think when you say, is this becoming more prevalent? Yeah, it is, because, it's a conversation that has to be that has to be occurring. And I think, the modernized manager and leader understands that culture, we talk about culture all the time. Culture is developed in capital C community, and the zip codes where our workforce, where our care force comes from, not small c community.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I want to really understand that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as an administrator, back in the day, I thought my mission, my vision, my values of the organization was going to be something that would naturally attract people who also had a similar mission, vision, values. And I thought that pizza parties and water bottles and pedometers made a culture. And I thought, because I was an engaged leader and I was what I thought was creating such a dynamic culture, that I would just have the doors being knocked down of people that wanted to come work at the nursing home I was managing. And and so I call that small c community.
Okay.
I never considered for a moment big C community, the community in which our employees come from, their zip code, not mine. What's happening in their home lives? What's happening? Is there gun violence? Is there, drug dealers on the corner? Or, is there a reliable public transportation? Is there opportunities for healthy food? And so the part of the work that Radical Sabbatical does is look at where our employees are coming from to understand their community.
Wow.
Go
ahead, Susie.
Do you think that because of what the 75% scored, do you think they're drawn to those caregiving roles because of what's happened in their past? And they're trying to help somebody else or somehow make it right? Maybe they didn't get closure. Maybe they didn't have a safe place to share. Maybe their family never talked about it.
Right, right, right. That's, I can only speak, I'll go back to
Mhm.
my own experience, 2 or 3 years after the adoption was closed, I was on the front line of care. So I will, as a certified nursing assistant. So I can speak to myself that my coworkers on the 3 to 11 shift became my family. And so too did the older adults that I cared for. I mean, I can still go down the hall and think of the numbers of the rooms and remember who was in what bed and what room and what they needed. And so I do feel that from my experience only, I can't speak for caregivers in general. I know that I was drawn to this profession of caregiving and stayed in the profession throughout college because it was more than a job. It was a place where I felt welcome, I felt seen, I felt appreciated, all of those things. And so most of that appreciation came from the older adults that I was caring for.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. I think we have just my own. I'm going to really date myself because we weren't even called we weren't called certified nurses aid. You were a nurse's aide way back when. And I almost think from my own, I can only speak on my own experience, that the expectations for a nurse's aide was very, I'm going to say right, wrong, or indifferent. It was strictly come within your hours. Here are your tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Here's your paycheck and go home.
Mm-hmm.
It worked when I think back as a teenager. It worked. The hours worked, the pay worked, and I did a bang up job. Absolutely great job with the people. But it wasn't that family environment. But I do think in being an older adult now in senior living and having a grandmother that was in a nursing home for 6 years, the expectations that we place on that caregiver role are above and beyond what I experienced as a younger person. And I definitely think, and I don't know, it could be the part of the country, this and that, again, I don't claim to know it all, but I do think expectations have become so much more than what, and some of it's good, right? I'm not saying that just task oriented is the right way to go. We want people, it's their home, it's their community.
Yeah.
But I do think we keep filling the plate. Others are, seeing these big expectations, and then everybody's shaking their head saying, why isn't this working for anybody, for anybody? So I don't know.
Well, I'll add to that, Deanna. I think that's an excellent and accurate observation of the burden of care and the burden of the job, piling on the plate. More shifts, please. Work a double, work short, like all of those things. It's difficult now that we have the data from the CARE and the NACA study. When an individual has 4 or more ACEs, what that means is that 4 or more types of adversity, so those things I mentioned, child abuse, child neglect, horrible things. When an individual is traumatized like that in childhood, as our brains and our bodies are developed, what happens with those 4 or more ACEs is that trauma changes the brain. It changes how we develop. It changes and keeps us locked in almost into this notion of what's known as toxic stress. So if we aren't healing from those things that happen to us, we show up as adults in our stress response activation. So because we're already wired for toxic stress, if anything triggers a stressful moment, we move into what's known as fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn is known as a stress response activation, and it used to keep us safe from predators way back in the prehistoric times. So we need this brain-body connection. We need, if there's a bear in the woods and we come upon a bear, we need to know if we're going to fight that bear or fly from that bear. But nowadays, what happens with toxic stress is everything feels like a bear if you are triggered, if you are suffering with toxic stress. So in our nursing home environments right now, what you just described is we're kind of creating the environments in which toxic stress can thrive. So when a CNA, I have 4 examples of working with my clients. One client told me that a CNA was punched in the mouth by a male resident. She turned around and punched him back, also in the mouth. That's fight. I have another story from another client whose CNA watched as there was a resident to resident altercation. So she was witnessing this fight happen between 2 individuals. She locked herself into the med room. That's flight.
Mm-hmm.
Freeze came when a supervisor told me how their laundry person that worked in laundry just stood like a statue, eyes straight ahead. She didn't even know if this individual was breathing as a daughter berated her for shrinking her mom's sweater. That's freeze.
Wow.
And fawn happens when our nurses pick up shift after shift. They drive the van. They do the MDS assessments. They fill in for life enrichment. This fawning or people pleasing is also a stress response.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically are creating environments in which people with adversity and toxic stress come into our communities, and we are triggering their stress response.
Wow. How can we as individuals or companies support individuals and communities going on this healing journey?
Yeah. Well, you got to be aware of it. You've got to be aware of what it means to have an ACE score of 4 or more. You have to be aware of what an ACE is. You have to be aware, I'm going backwards in my curriculum. You have to be aware of what the definition of trauma is. And so really, my goal is education and advocacy, meaning the more people know, this is information you can't unhear and you can't unsee,
right? Because
you are experiencing it as a manager and a leader. And so once you know this, you can't go back to the pizza party. You just, if you do, great. But if, there's a different way to manage and lead. And this is it. This is it.
Wow.
I don't know if I answered your question, Susie, but I do stick in the awareness phase for a long time with organizations to make them aware.
Mm-hmm.
And once you give those scenarios, like I just did, like the male resident and that kind of thing, people are like, oh, yeah, you just described things that happen in my nursing home on a daily basis. And, it really is powerful information. And just, I'm not looking, we talk about culture change all the time in senior living. I'm not looking for this giant culture change. It'd be great. I want to see incremental shifts of just, seeing more compassionate conversations with our CNA who isn't showing up on time, or our RN who is not documenting correctly. I want to see an understanding that it just isn't noncompliance or poor behavior. There's a reason why people act the way that they act. Same for our older adults. And getting, going deeper. And I really think that we need to do that.
Earlier in this podcast, Jean, you made reference to having a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
For dialogue like this. Where would that safe place be?
Well, I think, so that's a really great question, Susie, because one of the things that I am very careful of watching out for is this idea of re-traumatization. And it's even in the regulations, Regulation 699, it calls it out that trauma-informed organizations who are organizations that realize the widespread impact of trauma, recognize the signs and symptoms, and take steps to mitigate against re-traumatization. So in the clients that I work with, the nursing homes and assisted living companies that I work for, It's really helping them understand what it means to them to be safe. So one of the things I just implemented when I start my curriculum with people is I have them develop their own safety plan. Because I don't know what safety looks like for you or for Deanna, but you do. You know when it doesn't feel safe any longer. So when those things happen and we're in a course together, what can you do to care for yourself? Does that mean you go off camera? Does that mean you leave the lesson completely? Does that mean you leave the series completely? Whatever it is, the idea is that you are creating your own safe place and giving agency back to you. This isn't mandatory training. This is training for individuals who really want to understand trauma and get themselves on a path to healing.
Mm-hmm. I think my biggest takeaway from this is it's interesting. I think the biggest, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the biggest challenge with on the business side, healthcare side, senior living side, we see it all day long, is communication, communication, communication. And what I'm hearing from you is we as a whole have to do a better job of walking in the shoes of others and we can never walk in each other's same shoes, but I always say we can be close if we understand and educate ourselves and take advantage of education. But if we can do that, I can see what you're saying about we can't have the expectation of this major tidal shift, but individually that would lead logically to individual change. But to your point, we've got to be aware, number one, and be willing, number two, and understand how to do it, number three. What rewarding work, Jean, this must be for you when you see it, though. I mean, it's got to be, I'm trying to really walk in those shoes of such a yay factor at a community, even if it's a couple of people that are now that the tenure goes up, or they've got a positive response from a resident that they're caring for, that maybe it was a breakthrough, whatever that breakthrough may, or is that are those the type of results that you see and live for and work for?
Yes. Yes, to all three. I see and live for them. I see those results and I live for those results. And so it's so gratifying to see people say, to be aware of. I mean, a lot of times what people say is, I just thought I was like really messed up. Sometimes they use another word. I just thought I was really messed up, but you've explained to me like why I am the way that I am. Because these things happen to me. No one's given me that language. Now, I didn't give the language. The ACEs study gave the language. I'm just teaching the language. So, and then also I'm talking about my own stuff. You know, the keynotes I give now is my story. Because even if your trauma isn't similar to my trauma, just knowing that someone went through what I went through, and people in the audience went through what they went through, and we're both still here, that's pretty powerful.
It's super powerful. Plus, when you realize someone could have a very similar story as you.
Oh, yeah.
15-year-old, unplanned pregnancy, and they could have walked through it very differently. One person is pushing through, I just got to make it through the next day, month, year, and another person maybe self-isolated and just froze or stays quiet, never told anybody. I'm grateful to hear that you've got resources. You mentioned the workbook, because I think sometimes people may feel, oh, I need to tell so-and-so they need therapy. Well, that's over well.
Yeah.
But a resource, a workbook that they could take themselves through could be beneficial. I'm curious too, is there a place we can read those studies that you made reference to?
Yes, absolutely. I will send you a link. So it's the CARE study, the NACA study, and it's the Trauma and Resilience series, report 1, 2, and 3. So I'll send a link so you can link it once you publicize this podcast so that people have that information. One of the things you said, Susie, really grabbed my attention because, we do think, oh, trauma healing must mean I've got to find a therapist and, I'm not really great at talking about my problems. This is typically what I hear from leaders is like, well, I don't want to sit around a table and talk about my team's issues. I get that. But what I tell people is that you don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. I'm not asking leaders all of a sudden to be therapists. I'm just asking them to be therapeutic in their approach, compassionate in their approach. And even that is a big ask for some. I mean, it really is. I'll be honest with you. Some people are like, this really sounds really far-fetched, Jean. And I'm like, okay. One CEO told me that. I was like, okay. I mean, thank you for your time. And when you're ready, give me a call.
I always say it's very difficult to change the world, but if you live with the mindset every single day, you have an opportunity to change somebody's world. It leads back to those incremental shifts that allow us to move forward day to day with, in my opinion, that type of mindset that you're never going to have 100% on board with any idea. But if you're focused and you are passionate and have purpose and believe in what you're doing, you're going to make those strides. You're going to make those, and you are making those strides, Jean. So kudos.
Thank you. And I will tell you, I'm hoping to have kind of that proof in the pudding. This fall, grant funding dependent, I'm partnering with a nonprofit nursing home here in Omaha, where so I've trained a lot of people from the research to the me search is my 10-part curriculum. But what I'm interested in doing is going grassroots and going every week to the community and teaching the 5 modules that is all about trauma. And in between those 5 modules, I go in and we do exercises from the workbook. So it really is looking at what trauma is, and then how do I integrate trauma healing into my own life? And we're interested in seeing of those employees that we train, will we see a change in the way that they show up at work? Will we see a change in turnover? Will we see a change in the way that they provide care? So we're interested in taking the qualitative and moving it to the quantitative. Kind of like what you said earlier, Deanna, that someone said to you, a leader said to you, it feels like trauma's everywhere now. People are talking about it everywhere. They are qualitatively, but quantitatively, I don't think that we have the results to show that when an organization gets on this path with their employees, that it actually changes the bottom line, turnover, quality outcomes. So that's what we're attempting to prove if we get the grant funding.
Wow. We will keep fingers crossed for you. We will keep fingers. Boy, Susie and I say this every blue moon. There are certain guests that come on where we always say we need a part 2. I think we need a part 2, Susie. What do you think?
Yes, I definitely think we do.
We need a part 2.
I would love that.
Yeah. How do people reach you, Jean?
The best way is through my website, which is www.radicalsabbaticalcare.com. I'm also frequently on LinkedIn, so they can search my name, Jean Hartnett, Radical Sabbatical, and make a connection there if they're interested in connecting professionally.
Super, super. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest. I've learned a few things on this podcast already. My head is still going in a million questions that I'll probably have to ask you offline, but good stuff. Thank you so much. Susie, do you have any parting thoughts for Jean?
What a lifeline. Thank you for that. As you were speaking, I'm thinking of different characters I've met through decades and experiences where maybe someone responded in a heat of anger that just seemed, wow, where did that come from? Or another person just withdrew and boom, disappeared. And as you're telling these stories and talking about these studies, I'm realizing oh, wow, those could have been trauma responses that they've been carrying around with them forever, not
Yeah.
even realizing. And so your information, I'm anxious to check out your book on your website and learn more and see, we can be a light in the community as well. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Deanna, for having me today. It's been a great conversation.
Awesome. And thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners. We hope this is informative. We know it will be. Thank you.